is Chris Smith, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Wright Brothers. Two brothers who didn't both have high school educations, who didn't have much money, and who changed the world with their hard work, their creative ideas, and their collaboration together, and their invention of the airplane. They had moved a lot when they were kids. Their father was a bishop in a church, and he moved around. In the process, their mother ended up schooling them quite extensively. So they learned early that you read at home, you study from your home library, you just study all the time. When Wilbur was in high school, he had an accident, and it was a skating accident, and he got a bunch of teeth knocked out and was pretty sick. So he stayed home after that and had a lot of problems health-wise. So he really never went back to school. So Wilbur never actually had a high school education, except he got educated at home. His mother was sick, and he stayed home in part because he had been hurt and was still ill, and because he wanted to take care of his mother. So he spent a great deal of time in the family library studying and reading to his mother, and thinking about how he could learn all the time. Orville, on the other hand, finished high school, and by that point the brothers, lived in Dayton, Ohio with their family. They were a close family, 5 children, 2 other brothers and 1 sister, Catherine. Orville was the hands-on one. He was the one that liked to do things and kind of make machinery work. Wilbur was the studier and the thinker, and they both were thinkers, but Wilbur was the studier more, and so they actually were a great combination together because of that. They early on were interested in what was changing in the world, how things were happening. Orville started a printing business when he was still in high school, and he ended up printing school newspapers and all sorts of small printing jobs like business cards. And as Wilbur got better and as their mother passed away, Wilbur became a partner with Orville, and they had a printing business. It's kind of interesting to note that they were very, very resourceful. So, for instance, with the printing business, they eventually had a newspaper for the black community in town. Their father had taught them, because of his religious views, that all men were created equal, and so the brothers were friendly with the black community and had a paper for that community and a paper for their own community. As their newspaper business got bigger and bigger, they had to get a new press. Now, a printing press, and you'll see a picture of it in this presentation, has a big slab, and little tiny pieces of either rubber or wood that are carved out like letters, kind of inverted letters, are placed in tracks along that slab, and then ink is rolled over that, and then paper is put on it and pressed down, and that's how the newspaper is pressed and made, one page after the other. Well, the brothers didn't have much money, so they decided what they would do was buy an old tombstone for the slab. And then their family helped them buy tiny little pieces that they needed to make the different letters and to create the sentences for their newspaper. At one point, Orville charged 50 cents a year for the weekly newspaper. It was called the West Side News, and there's a picture of that in the slides that you'll see in this presentation. Well, they moved on to bicycles, as you all know, and they eventually had their own bicycle shop. The way that started was that people learned early in Dayton, Ohio, that if you needed something fixed, the Wright Brothers were the place to go. The Wright Brothers had their print shop, their newspaper office, and so people would bring their bicycles in to get work done on the bicycles, and pretty soon the print shop became the bicycle shop, and they had an upstairs area in the shop where they did like the machining work, the small machining work for bicycles, and eventually the brothers made their own bicycles and sold them. And one was called the Van Cleve, and you'll see a picture of that in the slides I have. The Van Cleve was $65, which was their high-end bicycle, and that represented a couple of months of earnings for a working man. Today, there are only 5 of the Wright Brothers cycles left that we know of in existence, and they're pretty valuable and important. The brothers did a lot of socializing in Dayton, but they never did date, and they actually created their own business together, and their joy in life was inventing. So they stayed together, neither of them married. In early 1896, Orville, as a young man, contracted typhoid, which was a very deadly disease. Wilbur stepped in again, this time to help take care of Orville, and his sister Catherine helped also. It was winter time, and it took Orville about 6 weeks to recover, and fortunately their business was slow. At the bike shop, it was winter time, and you guessed it, they spent time in the family library studying more and more. They also kept up with the news. They understood that Alexander Graham Bell had perfected the telephone, and Thomas Edison the light bulb, and they were excited about the age of invention. And they thought the airplane was what they were interested in. So they first looked at creating a glider that would actually stay in the air, and that wasn't very easy at that time. There were a lot of problems to be solved, and they took it on. There were people all over the world, in Europe and other places, looking at trying to create gliders and then move to airplanes. The brothers knew how to study, so what did they do? They wrote to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and asked for anything related to human flight. And they got a stack of papers and ideas back from the Smithsonian. Is that amazing? This was, in 1899, and I don't know how the Smithsonian would react to a letter like that now, but they delivered. The Smithsonian, by the way, is an institution that was created because a British scientist left his entire estate to the United States of America for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. Today, the Smithsonian is more than just a place for scientific research. Sometimes people call it the nation's attic, because all sorts of collections have been amassed in the Smithsonian Institution, and it basically is the center of 19 museums in and around Washington, D.C. Today, the Wright Brothers 1903 airplane hangs above the main room in the Air and Space Museum of the Smithsonian. Oh, they were happy to start thinking about flying. They figured they had 3 problems to solve. One was building an engine that would make the aircraft move forward, and since they were already into building mechanical things in their bicycle shop, they figured that would be the easiest problem, to build a small engine to their design. The next one was constructing a wing that would be able to lift the machine, and the last was controlling the machine once it was in the air. Now, that gave rise to how could they test these different parts of the process of learning to create a machine that could fly. They looked at birds. They went to the fields and actually just watched birds. Lift is an upward force that opposes the pull of gravity. So you have gravity pulling down and this lift pulls up, and that's how big airplanes fly. Their wings are designed so that they can just lift on the air. And the brothers knew this was important. This was a very important thing to learn to do. And they started thinking about the shape of the wing. They looked at the shape of wings of different birds and tried to figure out which one would come closest to what they needed. Well, they're thinking about this problem. They're still working. They have their own job, and that's in their bicycle shop. And one day, Wilbur was changing an inner tube of a bicycle. That's a sort of a long piece of rubber that's in a cylinder, and you put it inside of the bicycle tire, and then you pump up air in it, and it blows up the tire and makes it steady and firm. Well, it did at that time, in a long, skinny cardboard box, about like that, and the box was flimsy, it was cardboard, and as Wilbur was taking the inner tube out to put it in a bicycle, he realized that he could twist that skinny box, and he could change the dynamics of the box, and he could make an airplane wing with some, I'll call it sculpturing that was the same as a twist, and that's what he did. And that's how they created the first wings that they used, which were designed to allow that wind to help lift the airplane up, because the wings were such that it would catch the wind, sort of slicing into the wind. Well, that was an invention in itself. They still knew that they had to design a plane that they could maneuver, they could direct and control. And they knew they had to do experiments. And so they wanted to go somewhere in the United States where they could do experiments. You guessed it, they sent another letter, this time to the United States Weather Service. And they asked to be told of places in the United States that were not very busy, where there weren't a lot of people, but there was a lot of wind, and there was a beach, so they could have soft landings as they took this glider up with them in it. And of course they got a nice set of information back, and they picked Kitty Hawk, which is in the outer islands of North Carolina on the Atlantic. The brothers had not been very far from home, only to Chicago, and that was only once, I believe, but they knew they had to go to Kitty Hawk. So first off, Wilbur boxed up the parts of a glider and took a train ride from Ohio to North Carolina. And when he got there, he of course still had to get on a boat in the Atlantic to get to the Kitty Hawk Island. He had written ahead to the postmaster, so the postmaster knew he was coming. He filled that boat, he talked the fishermen into doing the service for him, because there wasn't a ferry service. And you guessed it, a terrible rainstorm hit. Well, this was a 2-day journey in a fishing boat to get to Kitty Hawk. And he thought the kitchen was too dirty and it was just a tiny little boat. He spent the 2 days only eating from a jar of jelly that his sister had packed for him to bring along. When he got there, Bill Tate, the postmaster, was there to greet him, and there wasn't a hotel. There wasn't anything, but the Tate family and the people on that island, while they didn't think much of an idea of flying, they certainly were honest and helpful, and they took the brothers in, Wilbur and then Wilbur and Orville. And during that time, the brothers built 2 sheds, one for their equipment and one to live in, and there's pictures of that in the slides that you'll see. Of course, the weather is chilly. It's winter time. The wind blew well in the winter. Actually, it was even in the fall that they started, and they ended up coming back in the winter. The thing is, they also had bugs, mosquitoes that were as big as they could be, and they wrote about bundling up in their blanket with just their noses showing at night so they could sleep. Of course, they didn't have windows or screens, they just had these tents. And then they'd have to take off the blankets because it was too hot, and then the mosquitoes would attack them again. But all in all, they loved this experience. They came down 3 years in a row, just looking at different parts of the glider, and eventually knew that they had a solution that they could fly. And of course, they were on to going the next step to the aeroplane. They worked on a motor because they wanted a plane that could be driven by a motor, so you didn't rely on whatever winds were there. And they did it. They came down in December of 1903. The first run failed, and they had decided by a coin toss that Wilbur would go first. So they had to repair some of the small parts that were damaged when it just went up and crashed quite quickly, but it wasn't a bad, dangerous crash. On December 17th, Orville was next. So they were ready. The men on that island that helped them were part of what was basically a civil service group that helped in case anybody had a boating accident. It was the start of the Coast Guard, and those men watched for the flag to be raised in this camp area where the brothers were, and they knew it was time to come and help, so they did. They came down, and about 10:30 that morning, they were all ready for this wonderful flight. Now, one of the things is that the brothers had determined that they had to control the plane, and how did they do that? That was a big problem for them. While they were in Kitty Hawk, they invented in their minds and then tried out making the tail of the plane movable so that they could manage the balance and the tilt with the tail. And that was a big, big step forward. So when they were ready on the 17th, they put up the flag. The Coast Guard came, and about 10:35 the men arrived. They had a tiny platform that they put this airplane on so that it would have a start. They could have a push down an incline to get things going. And of course they didn't have wheels even on the first planes. And one of the men was asked to take a picture. They had set up a camera with a little bulb that you just squeezed and you could take a picture. And the man had never used a camera, but this was the first picture of a plane in flight. The brothers shook hands knowing this could be a dangerous flight, and Orville took off, managing the pilot controls, laying flat on the center of the plane. And there's a picture in my slides of that. And the plane rose in the air. The picture was snapped, and it was the first flight. Over that couple of hours the first day, they flew 3 more flights, and one of them was 59 seconds and 852 feet, which would have been the length of 2 football fields. The brothers had conquered the air. Now, people in Europe didn't believe them. It took 3 or 4 more years of going down to Kitty Hawk and doing work in the practice field they had in Dayton, Ohio, before anybody paid attention, but eventually they did. The French had thought they were the first to do it, but when they realized what the brothers had done, they welcomed them with open arms. As a matter of fact, the French wrote, "We are defeated, we are beaten. It was not merely a success for the Wright brothers, but a triumph. It will revolutionize the world." And the brothers did. Just to finish this small story about the Wright brothers, some of the other activities going on trying to fly were costing $70,000. Big institutions like the Smithsonian were supporting. The brothers did their entire work for $1,000, which is the meager profits from their bicycle shop. They did it all themselves. Materials, travel, everything came to a little less than $1,000. For more than 50 years, long before the Wright brothers took up their part to be would-be conquerors of the air, their strange, childish flying machines, as described by the press, had served to be a joke. The press originally thought it was just a joke. But the brothers knew better. They knew, I'm quoting now from David McCullough's book, The Wright Brothers. They knew that they had something. And they understood that the wings themselves of birds were what was necessary to understand so that these tiny little birds who flew through the air like a cannonball could become the model for an actual airplane. Many thought that they were just silly people, but even the Kitty Hawk people, who really did not think there was any need to fly, recognized and honored the hard work they were doing. Those people in Kitty Hawk said the Wrights were 2 of the workingest boys they had ever seen. And when they worked, they worked. They had their whole heart and soul in what they were doing, and that made a difference. The brothers themselves said, "We had no special advantages. The greatest thing in our favor was growing up in a family where there was as much encouragement to intellectual curiosity." They were not discouraged because they didn't have a college education or training. Friends weren't really supporting this whole idea except for their family. They didn't have financial backers, but they knew that they could do it. They just knew they could. They said the best The dividends on the labor they invested have invariably come from seeking more knowledge rather than more power. They were in search of knowledge, adventure, and something new. And that's the Wright Brothers. I hope you enjoyed this.